Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at marine engineering drafting. We've got some really cool information from RoleCatcher, and that's a career development platform. It seems like they have a ton of resources for this kind of stuff.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this career path is that it's a really unique blend of art and engineering. Basically, marine engineering drafters, they take these like grand visions from engineers and then they have to turn them into these super detailed blueprints, and these blueprints are actually used to build ships. And we're not just talking like little sailboats here. I mean,
Huh.
these are massive cargo ships, high-speed ferries, even submarines.
Whoa, submarines. That's wild. So it's like they're architects, but instead of buildings, they're designing these massive vessels that sail the sea. I've always been fascinated by those giant cargo ships, the ones that look like they have like a whole city on them. It's incredible to think that a marine engineering drafter is a part of making those things a reality. But those ships are so intricate and complex these days. I'd imagine it takes a lot more than just a steady hand and an eye for detail, right?
You're totally right, yeah. Those old days of using pencils and rulers to make blueprints are long gone. Nowadays, it's all about using computer-aided design or CAD software. It's pretty amazing, actually. Imagine designing something as complex as a propeller system in 3D. You can spin it around on the screen, zoom in on every little detail, even run simulations to see how it will hold up against waves.
Wow. So they basically get to build these ships virtually before they even get near the water. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's like they have a digital shipyard right at their fingertips. And just like you need a good crew to run a ship, marine engineering drafters need a whole set of skills to be successful.
Makes sense. So what are we talking about here? What kind of skills do they need?
Well, they definitely need to be masters of CAD software, but there's a lot more to it than that. Think critical thinking, problem solving, even being able to communicate clearly with others. They are basically the connection between what the engineer wants and what the manufacturer actually builds. So they need to be able to speak both languages.
It's like they're bilingual, but instead of speaking two different languages, they're speaking engineer and builder.
Exactly. And speaking of having the right tools, this is where RoleCatcher comes in. They have a ton of great resources, everything from job postings to platforms where you can connect with other people in the industry. And they even have this huge database of interview questions.
Oh, wow. Interview questions, like a whole library of them.
Yeah, it's actually really cool. And they have a free membership you can sign up for. They even have a paid version where you can have an AI give you feedback on your interview skills.
Wow. An AI that can help you with your interview.
Mhm.
That's crazy. But for now, let's stick with the human aspect of things. So for someone who's thinking about a career in marine engineering drafting, what are some must-have skills that they should focus on?
Well, you're going to need a really good grasp of math. And I
Yeah.
mean a really good grasp. We're talking geometry, trigonometry, being able to calculate all sorts of dimensions and tolerances like it's nothing. They need to be able to take an abstract concept and translate it into measurements that can be used to build a ship that can actually float.
So it's not just about being able to make lines and curves on a computer.
Right.
It's about understanding the why and the how behind those lines and curves.
Exactly. And on top of that, you'll need to be a really good reader. And I don't mean the latest novels. I mean being able to decipher complex engineering plans. And they're often filled with all sorts of technical jargon and specifications that you'll need to be able to translate into drawings that anyone on the manufacturing team can look at and understand.
So like a scholar deciphering ancient texts. Except instead of figuring out lost history, they're creating the future of ships. I like it. And something else I noticed is that RoleCatcher mentioned job stability being a plus for this career. What does that look like exactly?
You know what? They're right. The boat building industry is actually growing pretty steadily right now, especially when you look at more specialized sectors. Think about things like eco-friendly yachts, electric ferries, and even those autonomous research vessels.
Autonomous research vessels, like self-sailing science labs.
Yep, exactly. And they all require marine engineering drafters to design them, which is why skilled drafters are in such high demand right now.
That's awesome. That's great news for anyone who might be considering this as a career. Now, I know we talked about a few different skills that are important for this job, but RoleCatcher also highlighted some interesting certifications that can really give you a leg up. Any in particular that stood out to you?
Well, the Certified Marine Drafter Certification, or CMD, is really the gold standard for anyone looking to get into this field. It lets employers know that you're not just messing around, that you really know your stuff when it comes to marine design.
Well, so it's like the difference between sailing a little dinghy around a lake and captaining a huge ship across the ocean.
Pretty much. It shows you've got the knowledge and the experience to navigate the complexities of the field.
So yeah, the CMD is like the captain's hat of marine engineering drafting.
Yeah.
What about other certifications, though?
Yeah.
Any others that you think are worth looking into?
Oh, for sure. Just like a captain needs to know their ship inside and out, a good marine engineering drafter needs to be up to date on the latest software.
Right, right.
That's where certifications like the Certified SolidWorks Professional, that's the CSWP, and the Certified AutoCAD Professional, those are really valuable.
So it's not enough to just have the tools. You need to know how to use them like an expert. Speaking of tools, let's talk career progression. Where can this career path take you? Like, what's the trajectory look like?
Well, you'd probably start as like an entry-level drafter, working on small parts of a much larger project.
Kind of like an apprenticeship almost, right?
Yeah, exactly, like an apprenticeship. You might be doing detailed drawings for like, I don't know, a yacht's electrical system, or maybe figuring out the design for the ballast tanks on a cargo ship, something like that.
Getting to learn from the more experienced drafters, kind of like a new sailor learning from, someone who's been at sea for a long time.
Yes, perfect analogy. And then as you get more experience, you could move into more senior drafting roles. That means you'd be taking on more responsibility, eventually maybe even leading a team on big projects.
So you could go from designing ballast tanks to being in charge of designing like a whole fleet of high-speed ferries.
Exactly. Or even like a super yacht for some tech billionaire, who knows?
No, that's what I'm talking about. Okay, so there's definitely room to climb the ladder in this career. But what about other options? What if someone wants to forge their own path, so to speak?
Well, you could always choose to specialize in something.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you could become like the engine whisperer. You become the person everyone goes to when they need something designed for a marine propulsion system.
Or the electronics guru who designs all the radars and navigation systems and all that.
Exactly. You become the go-to expert for that one very specific thing.
That's a cool option to have. But let's face it, we all know the job market can be brutal. What kind of advice does RoleCatcher offer for someone who wants to stand out?
They have these great tips for something they call beating the automated recruiter, which is super relevant these days.
Beating the automated recruiter. What's that all about?
Well, these days, your resume might have to go through some kind of AI screening before a human ever sees it.
Really? And AI is deciding whether or not I get the job.
It's just a first step. But yeah, a lot of companies are using them now to filter through applications.
So what? I need to make my resume robot-friendly.
Basically, it's about understanding what these AI systems are looking for. What keywords, what skills, making sure you have the right experience listed. It's like sending a signal that the AI is programmed to pick up on.
So it's like search engine optimization, but for your resume. Instead of getting more clicks, you're getting more interviews.
That's a great way to put it.
So how does RoleCatcher help with this exactly?
Well, they have these cool tools you can use that will analyze your resume and compare it to the specific job description you're applying for. It's like having a personal career coach helping you fine-tune everything.
Okay, that is super useful. Like having a secret weapon in your back pocket for the job hunt.
Totally. That way, you're not just throwing your resume out there randomly. You're tailoring it for each job to make sure it's seen by the right people. Speaking of skills, we've touched on a few, but I think it would be good to dive a little deeper. There's a lot more to being a marine engineering drafter than just knowing CAD software.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Let's unpack that a bit. Where do we start?
Well, we talked about math skills, but you'll also need a really good understanding of engineering and technology in general, particularly as it applies to marine design.
Right, so it's not like you're just drawing a pretty picture of a boat. You have to understand all the engineering that goes into making a boat actually function out on the water.
Exactly. You need to be able to look at an engineering drawing and understand things like tolerances, what materials are being used, all that kind of stuff.
Because you're not just making lines on a computer screen. You're essentially creating a plan for a structure that can withstand the forces of nature.
You got it. And that's where physics comes in.
Physics, everyone's favorite.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
But it's important, especially when you're talking about fluids and materials. You're designing something that has to operate in a very specific and often dangerous environment.
So things like buoyancy, how to make a boat stable, how to reduce drag in the water.
Yeah, all of that. Those are the kinds of concepts you need to be comfortable with. It's not just theoretical. It's fundamental to making sure your designs are actually going to work in the real world.
It's like the difference between drawing a picture of a bird and understanding the aerodynamics of how a bird flies, right?
Exactly. And it's not just the forces of nature you need to think about. There's also all the mechanical stuff.
Oh, right, like the engine, the propeller, the pumps. It's like a whole other world under the waterline.
Exactly. So you need to be familiar with all those different mechanical systems. You need to know how they work both individually and how they work together.
So you're not just drawing the outside of the boat, you're drawing the inside too, like you're giving people a glimpse into the guts of the ship.
That's a good way to put it.
Do you have to
Yeah,
know a lot about the actual building process too, like all the different techniques and stuff?
that's a good question. I mean, you won't be the one out there welding and riveting things together, but it definitely helps to have a basic understanding of how those processes work.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you're the one designing something, it helps to know what's possible and what's not, right? What are the limitations of the materials and tools and all of that?
You're exactly right. The more you understand about the manufacturing side of things, the more practical your designs will be. It all comes back to making sure what you're putting down on paper or on a computer screen, I guess, can actually be built.
Okay, so we've talked about math and physics and engineering and manufacturing. I think it's safe to say you need to be pretty brainy to be a marine engineering drafter. But what about other skills? I feel like we haven't talked as much about things like communication and stuff like that.
You're right. Those soft skills, as they're often called, are just as important as the technical skills.
Skills, hard skills, whatever happened to just skills.
Right. But anyway, yeah, communication is a big one.
I bet.
You're the link between the engineers who come up with these crazy ideas and the people who actually have to build them.
Okay, so you need to be able to speak engineer and you need to be able to speak builder. Sounds like a fun challenge.
It definitely keeps things interesting. And don't forget about listening. You have to be a really good listener to be a good marine engineering drafter.
Why is listening so important?
Because you need to be able to understand the needs of the engineers, but you also need to understand any constraints the manufacturers might have. Maybe there's a limited supply of a particular material, or maybe a certain tool isn't available. Being able to listen to and process all of that information is what allows you to come up with designs that are both creative and realistic.
It's like you're a diplomat trying to find common ground between these two different worlds.
Yeah, kind of. And speaking of challenges, you're going to run into design challenges. It's inevitable.
I imagine so. Something's bound to go wrong at some point.
Exactly. And you'll need to be able to think on your feet, come up with solutions. Maybe the original design doesn't work, so you need to go back to the drawing board, maybe literally. Or maybe there's a material shortage and you need to find a suitable replacement. Being able to problem solve is key.
It's like you're sailing through uncharted waters sometimes. You have to be ready for anything.
That's a great way to put it. And one more thing I wanted to mention was teamwork.
Teamwork makes the dream work, right?
Exactly. Marine engineering drafting is definitely a team effort. You'll be working with so many different people, engineers, architects, other drafters, people on the manufacturing team. You need to be able to communicate effectively, give and receive feedback, all that good stuff.
So if you're someone who likes to be on their own and do their own thing, this might not be the career path for you.
Probably not, no. But on the plus side, if you enjoy collaborating and bouncing ideas off of other people, it can be a very rewarding environment.
So we've talked about all sorts of different skills, from the really technical stuff to the more interpersonal stuff. But what about just staying up to date on the field in general? Technology changes so fast these days. How do you keep your skills sharp?
Well, luckily, RoleCatcher has some advice for that, too.
They think of everything.
Right. They actually have a whole section on their platform dedicated to professional development. Things like attending workshops, going to conferences.
So you're constantly learning and evolving, making sure you're always at the top of your game.
Exactly. And they also recommend joining professional organizations, things like the Society of Naval Architects and Marine Engineers.
That working. Always a good idea.
Yeah, and even just subscribing to industry magazines and journals can make a huge difference, like just staying up to date on the latest trends and technologies.
It's like you're always adding new tools to your toolbox, making sure you're ready for whatever challenges come your way. This has been an incredible deep dive.
It really has.
We've covered so much ground, everything from CAD software to the physics of buoyancy.
And don't forget AI recruiters.
Oh, yeah. How could we forget about them? But before we wrap things up, I always like to leave our listeners with something to think about.
A little food for thought. I like it.
So remember at the beginning we were talking about how marine engineering drafters are kind of like architects?
Yeah, architects of the sea.
Exactly. Taking these raw materials and shaping them into these incredible vessels. And we talked a lot about the technical side of things, the software, the calculations, the importance of precision.
All the stuff that makes sure those ships actually float.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But there's also I don't know if this is the right word, but like an artistic element to it too. isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about functionality, it's about aesthetics too, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen, like, a really beautifully designed boat?
Oh, yeah, for sure. There are some boats out there that are just stunning to look at, like works of art.
Right. And that's part of what a marine engineering drafter does. They bring that artistic sensibility to their work.
So they're not just crunching numbers and running simulations, they're also thinking about how the ship is going to look, how it's going to make people feel.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance between form and function, creating something that's both technically sound and visually appealing.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, anyone who's thinking about this career path, remember, you're not just drawing lines on a page, you're shaping the future of maritime design.
You're creating something that might one day sail across the ocean.
And that's a pretty amazing thing to be a part of. Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive.
Until next time.
As always, thanks for listening, everyone. Keep exploring, keep learning, and who knows, maybe we'll see you out on the open water someday.